Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Maker That Money here live on the YouTubes. We went a little bit later than normal. We're recording at 10:30 a.m. Pacific. Normally we do like around the 9 a.m. spot, but we had some scheduling stuff. Actually, it's my fault. My daughters were in their elementary school talent show, and I was not allowed to miss that. So we
Oh,
pushed a little bit later for that.
priorities.
Yeah. But we appreciate the flexibility of everybody. With me, as always, my partner in crime, Mr. Andrew Mayhall, owner, founder of 3D Gloop. Andrew, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm tired and I can't believe it's already Friday again, but
We
here we
say
are.
that every Friday. Uh,
I know.
and our special guest this week, Mr. Eric Hess, general manager of Maker Nexus, one of the biggest maker spaces in the San Francisco Bay Area, probably in California and stuff. I'm hoping you can speak to this, but Eric, tell us really quick before we dive completely in, what is Maker Nexus?
Sure. So we're a nonprofit makerspace. Recently moved, I guess not recently now, feels recent, about a year and a half ago into a new space in Sunnyvale. We have 28,000 square feet of combined communal workspace. So a nonprofit makerspace, for those that aren't familiar, is kind of like a gym, but instead of exercise equipment, we have tools. So you might go to the gym if you want to get fit. You might go to a makerspace if you want to learn woodworking.
Get your
We have
making
yeah,
skills fit. I like
yeah,
it.
exactly.
I like
um,
it.
yeah,
So
so full wood shop, metal shop, laser cutters, 3D printers, welding area. We just expanded from a standing Black and Decker grant that they very generously supported some of our expansion. So it's a great community space that we're really excited to share with the larger community in the Bay Area.
that's fantastic, and we'll dive in deeper a bit on just the mechanics of it. I know you just mentioned you got grant funding and you're a nonprofit. We'll get into that in a second, but I like to surprise our guests as always with our things that we lead off with. We are a very positive energy, forward podcast here, and we always like to talk about our wins for the week at the top of the show. So, Eric, you'll have a second to think about something positive, and it doesn't have to be business related; it can be personal or whatever. But we always like to start with that. And then, if you're watching us in the chat, please share your wins for the week as well. What's something good that happened to you guys this week? Andrew, you want to start or should I?
Let's do it. I'll go ahead and
Go
I'll go
for
ahead
it.
and take
Go for
it.
it. You knew it was coming.
Yeah. Okay, so win for this week. It's I'll go a little bit broad, but we're gonna be making some really big moves here at Gloop.
Big
You know,
moves.
I'm calling it the moonshot, and you know,
This is news to me. He's got a
we
moonshot in the works.
yeah. So we've phase one, I'll call it, of the moonshot plan
Yeah.
is finally underway. And
The Apollo 1.
lots
Yeah, okay.
yeah, lots of exciting things have happened. Just kind of like lining up a bunch of dominoes, and hopefully they'll all fall, piece by piece. And when we're left, like, we'll have this really cool picture.
This is mysterious. I'm intrigued.
I know.
So
Yeah,
so I can't wait
I
to
yeah,
want
hear
to know
more about this
yeah.
moonshot. Uh,
But well, the good news is it's all going good.
That's fantastic. As one would hope with a moon mission,
Yeah,
because failure is not an option for,
yeah.
for these types of things. Eric, you got an idea? What's something good that happened to you guys this
Yeah,
week?
we actually on the kind of the maker that money theme,
Mm,
we hired full time two new manager level positions who are some of our long term instructors who are going to be overseeing specific aspects of our educational programs. Ginger Lavelle heading up our metalworking and welding area,
wow.
and Miles Barman, who is going to be taking on a lot of the youth camps and education, youth oriented education that we do. And that's just kind of a reflection of the expansion and the hard work that the entire team has put in. That we're at the point where we're able to promote some people from part-time as needed up to really full-time there every day and really able to put their mark on the makerspace.
That's fantastic, man.
Awesome.
You guys are you're job creating, which is
Yep.
always a great thing. And it's awesome to see not just, the size of the makerspace grow for your members and stuff, but obviously to create new opportunities for the people that run it. That's fantastic, man.
Yeah.
Congrats. And
Yeah,
congrats to
yeah.
Ginger and I'm sorry, I missed the second
Miles.
name. Miles. Congrats, Ginger and Miles, on the new positions. That's great.
Yep.
That's great. We got oh good, but Mike's in the chat. We've seen a lot of familiar faces, but at the top we also like to remind everybody of our calls to action. So smashing that like button certainly helps. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Bring a friend. Tell a friend, any of that stuff. We love talking about maker entrepreneurship specifically on this. We joke and we say we're all about turning your hobbies into your jobbies. And so, I think that it's an underserved subject, which is why we started this podcast. That there's a lot of people in the maker sphere, in the maker world, that think that maybe they want to make a run of it, and the realities of what it takes to cross the Rubicon from a hobby into an actual sustainable business is always an interesting realization for many. So we talk about a lot of that stuff on this podcast. And we have a number of awesome guests, Eric being one of them, but we cover a variety of ground. So that's kind of the boilerplate for you guys if you're new and listening in after the fact. We're on all the major pod platforms, but we do record live on the YouTubes, as we said, just about every 9 a.m. Fridays Pacific time, which is a great way to interact with us. I'm referencing, we've got people chatting. If you want to call in, we're also a call-in show. The link for that is above me, the Maker That Money hotline, repkord.com/maker, MTM hotline. If you want to do that, or feel free to ask us questions and give us comments in the chat as well. And we'll try to get to them as best as we can. We don't always get to all of them, but we will try. So I think that's the housekeeping. Now
good to me.
now we want to get into the meat and potatoes. So today on the pod, we're talking about building sustainable makerspaces. Now, a couple weeks ago, we did have an episode where we did talk about makerspaces and the business mechanics of them. But this is a subject that's near and dear to me because I got my start in a makerspace. I know that Andrew has had relationships with makerspaces in his area as well. And Eric, this is not your first rodeo either. I imagine you've probably been involved with other makerspaces and work with them still, I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, I got my start in Tech Shop was my first
Mm-hmm.
makerspace that I was exposed to, and was a member at Tech Shop up until they closed. Probably a lot of, if you're not familiar with it, that's a podcast unto itself.
Yep.
And when Tech Shop closed down, that was really kind of the impetus for Maker Nexus to get started. We looked around at the community in the Bay Area that was really, profoundly impacted by that. There are three maker spaces in the Bay Area: one in San Jose, one in Redwood City, and one in San Francisco, um, under the Tech Shop name. And when they closed down, there were just so many makers who were left out in the cold. We spent a lot of time, because of our community connections and background, of kind of like the core group that came together right at Tech Shop's close. We connect a lot of people with resources to like keep them, running their, Kickstarters and startups and things like that. Connecting them with, local laser cutters, who are doing that professionally
Okay.
because they didn't have access to a makerspace anymore.
Mm.
And that was kind of the seed of community that Maker Nexus was born out of. So we, we're in some, a lot of ways very fortunate to kind of have a community, already in existence that was looking for a space. And then when we launched the official announcement, we did that at Hacker Dojo, which is another space that's near and dear to my heart. They're more of a hacker space, but they're right next door in Mountain View.
Okay.
And so we had our first kind of town hall meeting to launch Maker Nexus out of that space. And it's a very different community, much more tech oriented, but still a great group of people.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I see Josh Manley, who was our guest that we talked about Makerspace. He's been involved in a number of makerspaces. He owns a company called cadclass.org. He's actually going to be back next week talking about his book that just dropped,
Awesome.
which is great. So we cannot get enough talking maker spaces and stuff. Like I said, we're
Hmm.
all makers at heart, and that's where a lot of us got our start. And that means different things. Like you said, there's kind of hacker spaces, and there's kind of different plays on the mentality. But a lot of it's about community. A lot of it's about the sharing of resources. uh Talking about the sustainability piece, that's something from the business side that I'm always fascinated by, because I got to tell you, I've come across so many, Eric, maker spaces that just don't make it because they're not architected a lot of times in a way to be
Hmm.
sustainable. So when I say sustainable maker spaces, like, what are the things that come to mind, and what are the mechanics that you guys have put in place to make sure that you can continue to grow, to continue to sustain operations?
Yeah, I'm going to preface this answer with this is going to vary tremendously regionally.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, in Silicon Valley, we're very, very aware that we have, some unique economic circumstances that make some things work better than others. Um, you know, Building a makerspace is just like, for me, just like investing. Like if you invest like all of your stocks in one company and that company has a bad month or a bad year,
Mm-hmm.
you might be out your entire investment. So diversifying is the thing that we really have tried to lean into, and was a core part of the business plan when we formed,
Mm.
is having like multiple different aspects of revenue generation that are all supporting the space.
Okay.
And makerspace has a huge amount, potentially a huge amount of space, and efficiently utilizing those different areas as much as you can is going to drive revenue. Even though we're a nonprofit, we're still a business. It's still a corporation,
Hmm.
still have bills to pay, still have staff to pay, rent to pay, utilities.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of that goes away because you're a nonprofit. It's just some of the mechanics on taxation and where revenue goes when you have excess changes a little bit. But we're still a company like anyone else.
Right.
We've leaned really hard into both the member experience, and we have about 400 members or so right now, but also education, team building events, uh, public events, things like that, that are going to bring both like feet through the doors. Every person who walks through is a potential maker.
Mm.
If they come because they heard that we're doing a International Women's Day event. We had a great event about a month and a half ago that was really well attended. And the vast majority of the people there had never been set foot in a makerspace or viewed themselves as makers. They sat down, did some different crafts, got some hands-on experience, and walked away like excited about making things. Um, so the diversification is like really that like the most core thing that I can recommend.
Okay.
Education. We do a ton of youth education, and that's a big part of our revenue.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
So talk about the revenue streams specifically, if you would. Then, like, when you're looking at it, and maybe the baskets in terms of which percentages are, if you can,
sure.
where the majority of the revenue comes in, and then what ranks lower.
Yeah. Right now, we're about 45% membership based, and about 40 to 45% education revenue. And then about 5 to 10% is various fundraising, grant support, things like that, is kind of the rough numbers. I haven't looked at the budget so far this year
Okay,
in
that
the
gives us
last
a
like
sense.
couple of weeks, but those are like rough ballpark numbers.
Okay. Okay. So what the thing, one of the things that makes me happy to hear, a lot of the maker spaces that I've worked with in the past were very heavily grant funded,
Mhm.
um,
Hmm.
and that's obviously very problematic, because hey, when the grant is allocated and the money is there, that's great, but obviously that's not a sustainable unless you have grant writers that are constantly seeking that out, which is a strategy.
Yeah.
But that amount of money that's allocated toward grants varies wildly and stuff, and it can be competitive too, right? There's other people fighting over the same baskets of grant funding.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
that's one of the things that we've really looked at. We use when we have grants, they're usually expansion grants. So like I mentioned earlier, the Stanley Black and Decker grant
Hmm.
that allowed us to launch a welding section of our shop,
Hmm.
and that builds long-term sustainability. But being able to do a chunk expansion like that, we brought in brand new Miller-Matic welders, built some tables, brought in a plasma cutting table. We've got a CNC plasma cutter we're setting up right now. All that was made
Nice.
possible because we had an influx of additional money that wasn't otherwise allocated. And that's one of the things that,
Mm.
we weren't dependent on that grant funding operationally, but it allowed us to like really significantly expand our education programs because now we can teach welding to youth and adults throughout Silicon Valley. And that's been one of our like really popular programs. And that's one of the things that for grant funding, relying on it for operational costs always scares me.
Hmm. Sure.
Mhm.
And
Sure.
fundraising is the same way. We moving into the space that we did, we raised about $750,000 to do the build out and retrofit of the space so that it was a functional makerspace from office space. Um, and that was all fundraising, and was something that was on top of our normal operating budget. We did ultimately have to dip into our reserves a little bit for that because our fundraising came up a little bit short of where we needed to be.
Hmm.
Well,
Mm.
construction costs over the last couple of years have, just absolutely skyrocketed.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
you're
so
in a very, very expensive place for all
Mhm.
that
yeah,
stuff too. San
yeah,
Francisco Bay Area
yeah. A lot of
is.
people are like $750,000. What'd you do in the building? And it's like a lot less than it seems like. You would
Put some
expect
new
for three
toilet
quarters of a
paper
million
holders in
dollars.
the bathroom.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting about makerspaces is there's a lot of creative ways to actually drive funds, drive revenue to the whole thing. Josh Manley in the chat mentions that on-site storage was huge for him at one of his makerspaces because it was a sticky thing. It made people feel invested in the space. They had their stuff there, and therefore they
Mhm.
were there more often, and they felt like they were utilizing it. So these interesting like mental strategies. I think you mentioned you have events all the time, and so when you can kind of partner with other groups that like to use the space for their types of purposes, there's a lot of interesting opportunity there. What other creative, revenue streams have you guys found besides the traditional gym membership type stuff?
I definitely like the mention of the storage space. It really, that's a great point. That really brings a lot of, it's a small amount of revenue, but brings a lot of attachment to the community.
Mm,
We also have studio spaces where people who like really want a permanent presence in the makerspace
hmm.
can rent out a small studio within the space. So
Oh,
they
very
they
cool.
actually have some area and room where they can set up on a more permanent basis
Hmm.
and have like all of their tools set up in their area, have a quiet workspace. And those are really popular. We have a wait list for those currently. We're going
Mm.
to be expanding and adding in a few more of those. Um,
How many?
team
How,
building.
can I ask how
Oh,
many spaces? Because that's exactly why I went to my
Mhm.
makerspace. There was it was
mhm,
like a co-working space partially.
yeah. We only have 3 of the private reserved offices
Mm,
and a half dozen or so cubicle spaces, and then some shared table spaces.
hmm.
And we're going to be doubling almost all of that with our next expansion, hopefully.
Nice.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, so that'll definitely bring in. Again, that's one of those you know diversifying your revenue streams.
Mhm.
That's consistent revenue that comes in every month, and has a wait list. So if someone leaves, it gets filled up right away.
Yep.
And that stability that for makerspace is really, really critical because you'll have months where for whatever reason, you just have a bunch of members that leave. And that might be
Hmm.
economic reasons, that might be
Mm.
school's out for the summer and they're
Hmm.
traveling.
Hmm.
And if you take a big hit and you don't have reserves to weather that, that can be challenging.
Yes.
And
True
so
for any
having that,
business. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah.
You have a outflow of customers in any business, and it's going to hit you hard.
Yeah.
Um, so having that diverse revenue stream, that makes it a little bit easier and evens out that ebb and flow of things like membership or like for us, summer revenue is a huge influx. Summer education, we do about averaging I think 4 or 5 youth camps per week throughout like
Oh, wow.
10, 11 weeks of summer. So we might have 40 or 50 middle and high school age students in the space um, pretty much every day, Monday through Friday for the next, starting in 2 weeks, for the next 12 weeks or so. And so that's a big influx, like very much like a sugar rush of
Mm.
cash into the space.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you have to be responsible about how you spend that for the rest of the year because
Hmm.
you don't have like that same. opportunity. So that ebb and flow, like you get a whole bunch of cash in, but you have to plan like, okay, I've got this for like the next 9 months, and you have to be careful about how you spend it and where you spend it. So just finding ways to diversify and even out that ebb and flow, I think is really, really critical. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, the youth
Yeah.
camps is the other one that I think a lot of maker spaces would really benefit from doing. There's a lot of revenue in it. There's a lot of grant support for it. There's a lot of local community organizations that will support that. Um, Also, at like the city and county level, county office of education sponsors programs through us. Um, and there's a number of city programs as well, particularly for youth who may not have access to those programs normally.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of ways, like where it's not necessarily in Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of people who very much understand the value of STEM education and
Mm-hmm.
STEAM education and are willing to spend money on
Sure.
that. But there's also a huge number of people who don't have access to those resources. And our whole goal of forming a makerspace is to lower barriers, to access resources and training and things like that. So finding ways to partner with local civic organizations and county organizations
Right.
to bring in both students, potential members, as well as funding that's kind of like outside the normal grant stream. Um, is another way that I think a lot of maker spaces would really benefit from having closer civic ties. Talk to the local city council and make those connections with the local, like find your mayor and go and sit down. In Sunnyvale, we're very fortunate. I want to give a shout out to Larry Klein, Sunnyvale mayor.
Hey, Larry.
He has yeah, he has a he has a Friday morning coffee hour where you can sign up and come and sit down and chat with the mayor, and anyone in the city can do it. Um,
Oh
and
wow.
so when we were looking at moving to Sunnyvale and having a space in there, that's the first thing that I did. Went and sat and talked with Larry, and he's I think been at every single one of our like major events that we've held since we opened. And he's been a really
That's
vocal
awesome.
supporter of what we're doing here.
That's
So just like
fantastic.
making those connections open up a lot of opportunities that would otherwise, just be missed or not even thought about.
Right.
Hmm. Yeah. So I kind of wanted to jump in here real quick and ask like on how the operation of the makerspace kind of takes place. If you could kind of dive in a little bit on basically like you know organization and process control, because like in many makerspaces that I've been with, there's no process, there's no
Ugh.
organization, it's just a nightmare. And that's a huge piece that comes into I feel like the success of the makerspace.
Yeah, and every makerspace struggles with that, I think. And I think there's a certain amount that comes with time. If you set like that as a goal and something that you want to orient yourselves towards, there's a huge diversity in functional models from like what we do, which is a little bit more staff heavy. We have a relatively high payroll relative to our overall budget. So we have a lot of paid staff
Mm.
that are executing
Okay.
our education programs, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's other maker spaces like Hacker Dojo has a office assistant, an executive director, or an events organizer and an executive director, and that's like their entire staff. Everything
Wow.
else is volunteer run. So it's kind of like very like two different ends of the spectrum in a lot of ways. And both are valid approaches. There's not one
Mhm.
that works better than the other. It really depends on like what direction you want to go.
Mm.
If you want a high level of organization, you usually need paid staff to really execute that, or you need some really dedicated volunteers who are just like um,
Sure.
organizational aces. One of the great things that Ginger, did, as soon as she came on is she, really went through the entire back metal shop and just cleaned it up, put everything in place. One of the things that gained to like the organizational question, um, building in systems that members can and community members can engage with easily is a big challenge. Everyone has different
Mm-hmm.
views of what
Mm-hmm.
organization means. I admittedly am not the best person to talk to about organization. I have kind of a photographic memory for where I've left a tool, which is great for me and horrible for
Uh,
everyone else.
Right.
sure.
I know I left it here.
I know where that is. Um, so taking like a really broad approach to organization and to just the how you want to lay out a space from a high level, and having a system that's accessible and easy for members to engage in is a big part of it. That might be color coding all of your tools that go in like your wood shop, or it might be the far end of the spectrum. There's a great book on makerspace organization um, that I'm totally forgetting the name on. They're over, I think, in Massachusetts. Have been running a makerspace for about 10 years, and they utilize a 6S system, which is the traditional 5S that was popularized primarily in like car manufacturing facilities over in Japan. Every tool has a place. Every
Mm,
tool, like
mhm,
it's a labeled, like you've got an outline of the tool
Hmm.
on the pegboard. There's no drawers, no boxes, nothing for things to hide in and collect dust.
mm,
I love that approach.
mhm.
It's hard to implement. It takes a lot of time and energy.
Well, and it
Sure.
requires buy-in from everybody. So there's an
Exactly.
extent like you have to have somebody that's like the junkyard dog, making sure that everybody's in compliance
Yeah.
with the policy, which was one of the hardest things about the place I was. Where it's like, yeah, getting people to take ownership. Everybody talks a good game, but when it's set up like in the co-op model, people were
Hmm.
terrible, man. They wouldn't put stuff away. They wouldn't clean
Hmm.
up after themselves. It would create safety hazards. It would do all kinds of other stuff. So first of all, I got a two-part question for you. One, give us like the brief overview of what your guys' org chart looks like, because I heard what you were saying, what Hacker Dojo, Maker Dojo look like, but I want to hear about yours. And then two, how do you mitigate some of the stuff that I'm talking about, where I'm not entirely sure what the size of your membership is, but managing the vast array of
Hmm.
membership and who's in charge of making sure everybody stays in check.
Sure. So org chart wise, our executive director, Jenny Higgins, heads the organization. We have a board that's currently seven members, and we're hoping to expand that up to nine. So if you're interested in being part of a nonprofit board and in Silicon Valley and want to be involved in makerspaces, send us a line. Um, it's a um, and then below Jenny, or not below, but next level down the org chart, we
Hmm.
have a series of managers. Myself is the kind of the operational head, general manager. Ginger is our metal shop manager. Miles is handling our youth camps. Sarah Kramer has been handling um, education broadly, and we'll be focusing a little bit more on like member side education. So all of our
Mm.
like basic training classes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
workshops, things like
Hmm.
that. Jen Hart also joined, and I forgot to mention her earlier as one of our wins. And Jen is going to be heading up our more of our team building, outreach, kind of um, that aspect of diversifying and building additional revenue in. And then next level down, we have what we call our managers on duty, consulting makers. So those are the people who are responsible for the day-to-day running of the makerspace. So
Okay.
they open,
Oh.
open and close, answer questions, fix machines, clean up, whatever, like anything and everything that needs to get done in the space.
Mm-hmm.
They're on top of it. We have about 10 of those. They're all part-time.
Mm-hmm.
Some work just 1 day a week. Others are close to 40 hours a week. Um, and then on our education team, we have about 30 or so instructors that are as needed part time.
Mm.
And they're responsible for delivering everything from our youth camps to our day to day like boss classes, like how to like not cut your hand off on a table saw.
Mm.
Um, and like,
Not rely on a saw
yeah,
stop to do it. Yeah,
we've
just
got a saw
Yeah.
stop.
yeah.
Yeah. We've had a one or two saves, but it's mostly people doing dumb things like running the aluminum miter gauge into the saw stop.
Yep.
That's happened 3 times. I'm like,
Oh
just check
no.
it. um, as far as like how it all gets wrangled, it's an ongoing. I don't want to say battle because it's very much a team effort.
Sure.
We're all on the same team ultimately. Members, staff. We're all makers. We're all working towards this. Shared goal of having a functional, safe, you know, great makerspace. Um, Sometimes the members, forget to clean up after themselves, and we have to be like, hey, like, don't forget, you need to vacuum up your space when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, they're phenomenal. People want to leave a space in a good condition. What I've seen is most of the problems are born out of ignorance and not wanting
Mm,
to ask questions or being afraid of asking
Mm.
questions.
mm,
Like someone might like have grabbed a tool and been using a tool and not know where it goes, and they might be like not feel great about like going and asking like, hey, like where does this go back? Because like someone else has something more important to do than answer my silly question.
Right.
And so like try and find a place that like it fits and then like put it back there. And it's not always the best, the best approach, but they're
mhm,
trying.
That's a
Making things,
let
yeah,
me stay on that for just a second because
sure.
I noticed this happening a lot in my and I'll bet you this is a really common problem. I think part of it too is like people might consider it to be a hit against like their maker chops. You know, these are a lot of like technical
mm,
people a lot of the times. So not necessarily like where does the tool go, but it's like, oh, I got this. I know how to figure things out. I can put I'm an engineer. That was my favorite. People think that
mhm.
because they're an engineer that means they
But
Know
obviously
how to
should
know how
know
to
how
run
to,
a saw.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
exactly, know how to run a saw or do all these other things. And it's harder than I think a lot of people think to just like ask for clarification because they don't want people to think maybe
mhm.
less of their skill set or whatever. So, what do you do to make people feel more comfortable about that and mitigate that? That's not an easy thing sometimes.
It's not. And that's 100% like customer service and just building a culture of, you know, both offering help in a way that isn't condescending, um,
Mhm,
and also like being very, very available for questions and making sure that you are going out of your way to answer and address questions as quickly as you can. Um, I've been in a wood shop long enough that when something is going wrong, I can hear the tool complaining. Um,
mm,
you hear the motor pitch change, and you're
yep,
like,
Uh-huh.
this is about to have kickback. Um,
yeah,
and there's so much that you can identify just from a like on a staff and expert level of like, okay, there's a problem that we want to like go and address. And most of the time that's just a like they just didn't know like that you shouldn't do like this one esoteric weird operation that they're like trying to sort their way through. But again, it's so much is based on like just not knowing. And that's one that like the double-edged sword of the maker mentality is like
mhm,
you learn by doing and you try things and like, well, that didn't work. And
yep,
sometimes, we spend a lot of time on safety in our classes because we want to make sure that they're not trying something that, is unsafe. So we cover some of the like more esoteric safety considerations, and then from there, it's kind of like experiment. Um, and we also try to have a very low pressure um, environment when like something does go wrong. So we had someone who um, pushed the guard on the joiner um, out of the way while they were joining something and got their finger pretty well
Mm.
oh,
because they,
no.
because they were defeating a safety device that's like
Mm.
painted bright red and is there for a reason.
Mm.
Um, and like on the one hand, like you and you just have to treat that with compassion to build a good culture. It's like, yeah,
Mhm,
they learned their lesson. Being mad at them isn't going to reinforce the fact that they got to go to the ER and get their finger glued up. Um, like they've learned that lesson and are like ready to learn better practices at that point. So if you
Mm.
approach that like a lot more um, gently and compassionately, it'll be a learning experience that's positive for the members,
mhm,
and hopefully reinforce like if you have a question about safety, ask first. And that's the thing that
Mhm.
we always have someone on staff. So there's a lot of spaces where it's more member run, so there might not be someone actively on staff. We always have a paid member on staff at all times,
mhm,
so there's always someone that they can go to and ask a question for.
Okay.
We also have a really large engaged, involved community that is more than willing to jump in.
Mm.
And building that community, I think, is the biggest thing that you can do to kind of like mitigate a lot of that. When the community starts not necessarily like policing itself, but self-governing and like reminding each other to clean up or like, hey, looks like you're looking at like where this tool goes.
mhm,
Like, do you want a hand? Or like, you know, you walk in, you're like, oh, this person is struggling to like figure out how they're going to do this cut. Kind
Mhm.
of like just
Mhm.
like check out what they're doing and see if they want some help. And building like that type of environment
Mhm.
takes some intentional work and some leadership on the part of staff to like really
mhm,
like say this is the culture that we want, where you're encouraged to ask questions and engage with other members. Um, and I think that's the biggest thing that you can do. Again, every environment and every community is going to be very, very different. But that's something that I've seen work across a couple different spaces, um, and just kind of leading from the front of always being willing to answer questions, particularly on especially on safety.
Mm,
If someone's like, "Is this cut
Mhm.
safe?" I will drop whatever I am doing to go and make sure that what they're doing is safe.
sure.
Um, because those are hopefully members and people that you care about, and you wouldn't want them to get hurt, or have them
Mhm.
inadvertently hurt someone else. So I think a lot of it is just like building in that type of culture and responsibility across the entire community,
Hmm.
um, from the executive director on down to the member who joined yesterday. Everyone should be
Mhm.
willing to ask questions and seek help. Um, I've been woodworking for 15 or 20 years now, and there's people in there that know way more than I. Like, they've forgotten more than I know. So there's times like, even I, as a professional woodworker, 15 years before I started Maker Nexus, I'm like, yeah, I've got questions. I'm like, is this safe? I don't know. I haven't done this cut before. And someone with more experience might, chime in and be like, yeah, I did this and it like kicked back, and like, this is the bad thing that you want to avoid.
Hmm. Hmm.
Always being willing to learn, I think I think you mentioned kind of like that, like, I'm an engineer, I should know this. Like, there's
Mhm.
a lot of ego that you just have to kind of like get over. And um, at risk of getting a little bit political, I'm going to say, like, guys have this a lot worse.
Yeah.
Um, the
Yeah.
the pretty much
Mhm.
every accident that we've had in our makerspace has been a guy who didn't ask a question. Um,
What?
and yeah, I know,
No.
shocking.
No.
Um, and that's one of the things, we really foster a very inclusive, open environment. And that's another thing that like really has to be done somewhat intentionally, because
Mhm.
it has for so long been a very male dominated space.
Mm,
Um, but there is some ego there that we just have to work to overcome, and like, there's no shame in saying I don't know.
yeah.
Um, there's so many things that
Mhm.
I don't know. Um, I'll always be willing to ask for help,
It's not an
and get a
easy thing
second
for a
opinion.
lot of people, though.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So in circling back on sustainability a little bit, we've talked about revenue. Let's talk about the other side of the coin, which is your cost structure. So obviously, you said you
Mhm.
have a very
Mhm.
large payroll. My guess is payroll is probably your number one cost center,
It is. Yeah.
and maybe second to, and then like probably rent, I would assume, or your overhead associated with the facility itself. You bring
Mhm.
up another interesting point: liability insurance, especially in this
Mhm.
area, especially with the size of entity that you guys are. I have to imagine that's a big cost point for you. What are some of the other costs, primary costs that you guys are dealing with? And then what responsibility you guys feel like you have to be keeping an eye on it? Where's opportunity to cut costs and make, like,
Mhm.
where does it ebb and flow most when you need to contract and expand?
Yeah. And we've been running very, very lean, as lean as we can for like really since our inception. We
Mm.
as makers, we get machines and restore them, and there's a cost to that. There's hours that are invested in that, and sometimes that's volunteers, sometimes that's staff. But if you have a staff member who's not doing something else, and you can have them clean up a machine, and that
Mm-hmm.
saves you the cost of like buying that machine new, that's sometimes a win for you. Um, Machine acquisition is one of the areas that being a nonprofit helps a ton. And that's one of the big cost areas that we've been able to save a ton on, through being very strategic in our acquisitions,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and grabbing good deals occasionally when they pop up. Even if that's something that we might plan to use in a few months. Occasionally that
Mm.
steel, like Ford Motor Company donated a PCB mill to us, a month or two ago, and we're like, well, we have a CNC program in development. We hope to
Mm-hmm.
launch that in 6 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sitting on a pallet rack right now.
Yeah.
But if it's free, and it's otherwise you're going to be spending
Yeah.
$10,000 or $20,000, on that in 6 months or so. You want to take a hard look at what your opportunity cost is,
Mm-hmm.
because that takes up space, and that space could be
Mhm.
member storage, and that might be revenue. So it's a balancing act. Electricity is our one of our big costs. A space as large as ours, lights on, we're
Sure.
open 10 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Mm. Interesting.
So our electrical bill is pretty significant. Um, One of the things that I definitely look at, like, where you can invest as, organizationally, where you can invest in savings in the long term. We just put in LED lights in about half the space. We're
Hmm.
going to do that in the other half. The energy savings from those LED lights in 4 months pays for the fixtures themselves, and
Oh
in like
wow.
another like 4 or 5 months, hopefully pays for the install. But you have to have all
Hmm.
that money up front. So
Hmm.
Yeah.
you're
Hmm.
you're dropping $20,000 up front, but you're going to see those savings long term. And that's one of those things that organizationally, every organization has to do some of that long term planning of where we're
Hmm.
going to invest for the long term savings.
Hmm.
Because, you know, a year from now, you're going to look back and be like, man, I spent all this money. If we'd just been able to like fundraise that at the beginning or get a grant or like, dial something else back to be able to achieve those savings, that's where like your board governance and strategic planning comes in,
Hmm.
of like where you're going to try and find some of those cost savings. Um,
Sure.
Other big costs are materials. We have a huge amount of youth programs and things like that we're doing,
Hmm.
and so we have a lot of different materials that we have to source from different locations. That takes time and money for both those. People have to go
Mm.
down and chase down a whole bunch of different like robotics components versus buying a pre-bought, like a pre-made kit.
Are there
Like
not
those are
explicit material fees typically charged for these types of things? Are they rolled
There are.
in? I
Yeah,
mean,
they
okay.
they they get rolled in, but
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
like, when you're talking about, like, trying to, increase
Mm.
access to something, if you have a
Sure.
$200 material fee, like, that program just became $200 less accessible. So we're always
Uh-huh.
looking for ways
Sure.
to, like, get set up with wholesalers so that, like, we can bring things in bulk.
Sourcing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but again, like, all that ends up being money up front. It's a long-term savings. So, like, having kind of like a nest egg and initial, like, rainy day fund, rainy day pot that you can draw from for some of those strategic long-term
Hmm.
savings, um, is something that really really makes a big difference. You can only run lean for so long before things start breaking, um, and that's one of the things that like I really like caution a lot of spaces like burnout's a real thing, and
Mm-hmm.
you can run
Hmm.
lean for a long time, and people will start getting burned out. And you have to look at sustainability isn't just finances, but also like having staff and everyone else that's managing a space. Um, you have to make sure that
Sure.
those people, their institutional knowledge, all the things that they know, don't get lost if you burn them out and they
Hmm.
move on to a less stressful job. Um, or you want to just take care of those people, take care of your volunteers.
Yeah.
um
Yeah,
and
turnover costs is a
yeah,
lot bigger than I think a lot of
Hmm.
people for business realize, and when you have that a lot of institutional knowledge invested in people and stuff like that, you want to retain them obviously because bringing new people up to speed takes a lot of time and lose a lot of efficiency and stuff. So that's definitely a very good point in terms of a cost center that
yeah,
doesn't get looked at nearly enough for a lot of businesses probably.
yep,
Hmm.
yeah. Insurance is another one of those big costs, but you just have to pay it. Like, it's just,
Not a lot
you
you
just
can
Sure.
have
do.
to.
Yeah,
Yep.
bite the bullet.
Our landlord is Google, so like that's one of the things that like they really
Ah,
insist that we have a very very high a
GL, is it general liability? Do you have to have like separate insurance things
it's
for tools like how riders and
That's
stuff?
that's that's a great question. I'm gonna say I don't know the full answer to that. Our accountant, treasurer, handles most of the insurance, but yeah, general
Sure.
liability, specific event liability. So if you're holding a special event, usually you get like a 1 day rider for that event.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
makerspaces, like once our insurer underwriter kind of like knew what we were, and kind of like talked through it, like there isn't like a lot of insurance companies that are like, oh, makerspaces, that's like we'll classify that
Yeah.
as this. The first one that we talked to is like, oh, you have a wood shop, you must be like
Yeah.
rated like a cabinet shop. And I'm like,
Yeah.
we do not have the level of danger that cabinet shop has. It's just
Yeah.
um,
Don't.
and like city planning was the same way when we were trying to get permitted. They're like, oh, what's a makerspace? Like, oh, wood shop. And so like they're like, we want
Yeah.
explosion proof everything. And I'm like, they don't make planers that are explosion proof. Like they're just like that's not a thing that like industry makes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like a lot of it's like just building some understanding and in a very, very humble way. Because what you don't want to do is like go to the city and be like, no, I know more than you about this. Like that's
Yeah.
Sure.
I learned
Yeah.
that approach in our first space when we were going through dust collection. And I'm like, no, like these are the OSHA standards. Like we're an order of magnitude above OSHA standards, and you're telling me like you want me to put in a different system that's less safe. I'm really
Uh,
confused.
oh,
Um,
oh, you
and
you you think you can make this explosion proof? Hold my beer. I'll find somebody
yeah,
that can explode it.
yeah.
You know,
So I, in retrospect, 3 years later, like I should have approached that conversation with a little bit more humility, and been like, hey, like, why don't you come out to our space and like let's talk through like what you're looking for,
yeah.
and like I'll show you the
Mm-hmm.
tools that we're using and like why what you're asking
Oh my
may not
gosh.
make the most sense. Um,
Let
but
me
yeah,
tell.
and
I
yeah,
got to share a quick story on that. So I was really, and Andrew's heard about this in the past. I was really frustrated when we were trying to get renewed for our general liability policy in our
Mm-hmm.
shop because I kept getting like coverage for a year and then I would get dropped because every insurance provider says we're not insuring 3D printing anymore because it's dangerous. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, if you saw the machines that were, I mean, these are I mean, we're not
Yep.
using big metal powder machines. I'm trying to explain this to underwriters. They don't know what they're dealing with. They just know that they
Mm-hmm.
see reports about industrial injuries associated with like 3D printing, and then they're creating risk profiles based on that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so unbelievably frustrating because there's such a gamut of different technologies used for 3D printing. The risks of dealing with resin and chemical, type stuff versus FDM, which is generally pretty inert, and then, powder printers and stuff like that, where you've got, dangerous tungsten particles potentially
yeah,
floating around in the air and stuff. Massive difference in, liability, but to them it was just all lumped under it's too new, it's too unknown.
Yeah.
But some of the best results I had were similar to what you said, where it's like, come and see what we're talking about. These are hobbyist machines. These are,
Mm-hmm.
not, dangerous things. Like the quotes I was getting were like triple and quadruple, like the CNC machinist I had like next door
yeah,
was getting for his stuff. And they're vastly more dangerous at getting sucked into machines and, mangled
Yep.
and all that stuff. But,
yeah. I
it
I
doesn't
have
matter.
a really funny story like in that same vein.
Yeah.
When we were getting permitted for this new space, and like listing the equipment, 3D printers was the thing that got flagged.
Yeah.
And you're
Scary
like,
3D
what are
printers.
you doing to mitigate the risks of 3D printing? And I'm like, we have Prusa Mark 3S's, they're filament printers.
A
Like,
spool of
like what
filament
risks
fell
are we
on my
talking about? Like
toe. Yeah.
burns? Like we have a burn box here for like
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
like some Neosporin and some burn cream.
Yeah.
We had to submit MSDSs on every single
Uh,
brand of filament that we carried,
yep.
every
Yep.
single resin
Yep.
that we have. And they looked at that and they're like, okay.
All
Um,
right.
but it was like hours of work to like just get all the like information together. And it was just like, yeah, in Silicon Valley, like they're thinking like huge metal printers and like
Mm-hmm.
a
Oh yeah.
laser sintering machine,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
something crazy that's gonna like potentially explode
Lots of
or you know,
explosions. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, I kind of envy you guys though.
Yeah, I mean,
You should have seen what
you
the
actually have
insurance we
that
go through.
consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen to
Yeah.
Hazmat Man over here talk about what the DOT has and jump through, what hoops
I
they have and
I
jump
I
through.
I read the MSDS on that stuff, and I'm like, all right, this stuff will work. Great.
Yeah, yeah. It's all death. It's all just instant
Yeah.
death, and you just have to disclaim it, really, right,
Yeah,
Andrew?
and yeah, for a lot
Yeah.
of the stuff, like there's a ton of things. We have a big flammables cabinet, and we have to list every single thing that's in the flammables cabinet. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, we put our spray paint cans in there. Like, do I have to list it by color? So it gets a little bit silly in like the regulations sometimes,
Sure.
but the OSHA, the thing that I always recall from my OSHA training is like every regulation exists because someone died. And that's like not
Yeah.
to make it dark
Mm-hmm.
real suddenly, but there's a reason
Yep.
why the regulations exist, and we try and work with the city and county as much as we can to be like really on top of that because yeah, taking shortcuts and things like life safety, electrical,
Mm-hmm.
explosions, fire safety
Right.
gets people hurt really badly.
Yeah.
So we joke about it, but we take it seriously as well. It's
Sure.
just it's frustrating from a business management perspective of we're trying to do good things for the
Mm-hmm.
community and running into a lot of roadblocks that can be very, very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
So on the community front, one thing I have noticed, one of the strengths of a lot of these maker spaces is the fact that they play so beautifully. Like cities and public entities love them, right? They love to talk about them because it's just like we're making, people. We have these spaces where people can come in and make things. It just advertises so well. It markets so well. So
Mm-hmm.
what do you feel like you guys have done to like try to lean into that? Obviously, you mentioned you went to open office hours with the mayor and stuff like that, but
Hmm.
obviously there's great opportunity to get some visibility from that as well. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, yeah. So much like you, and want to take the moment to thank you for everything that you guys did during the early days of COVID, with making face shields and stuff like that. We were doing the same thing down in the Bay Area, and led a effort that in total, I think we made 335,000 face shields, that were distributed nationwide at no cost to the end users. So it's all supported by donations, things like that. That got us a lot of the really got us kind of like on the map, civically in the region, um, and like seeing that like really direct community benefit. Like before that is like very, very abstract in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, like makerspaces are great for the community, and like it's this community hub, and people can like start jobs, like businesses there, and things like that. But when like we started delivering face shields to local hospitals, like it was suddenly very, very real. Like this is a diversified manufacturing hub that can pivot faster than really almost any other business can. Um, that's one of the benefits about nonprofits. Like we had a whole bunch of
Mm-hmm.
volunteers come in and printing for us. A traditional manufacturing company like has to staff up and hire and things like that. And we're
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
come in and bring your 3D printer, or like 3D print and drop it off our doorstep. Uh, so um, so yeah, so like the civic engagement. Um,
That's a good
was
way to
very,
put
very
it.
abstract before that point. And then
Sure.
after that, like it was very, very real. And so now Sunnyvale has kind of a long-term plan to have a makerspace like in their like city center building.
Hmm.
Google and their renovations in this region, they're putting in
Mm-hmm.
like couple of major campuses, and doing some really cool mixed use, community, like more intentional, like community building with workspace.
Hmm.
They're looking to have some type of makerspace there. That's one of the big reasons why they're excited about having us in the region, is to build like that community and connection, um, among very, very diverse populations. Um, we ended up winning, Small Business of the Year, not Nonprofit of the Year, but Small Business of the Year,
Oh, very
from
cool.
Sunnyvale Chamber of Commerce, the year after the COVID effort, largely because of the face shield project that we did, and all the other like community service that we had done. And that's one of the ways that like you getting one of the things that I think makerspaces don't do well is advertise themselves.
Hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you go into a community, you take
Hmm.
100 random people off the street within a mile of the makerspace, and 95 of them will have never heard of the space.
Hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true of like every makerspace. We've got our Kool Aid, like we love our Kool Aid,
Yeah.
but we're not great about like getting like the
The
word about the
outreach.
Kool-Aid
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Sure.
one of the ways that I think like civically, like working with like city councils and civic leaders, I think lawmaker spaces could do a better job of that, of getting the word out. So
So
I think,
so we talk about this a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and this extends again to all business, that a lot of times the sales and marketing efforts are what
Mm-hmm.
really get left behind.
yeah,
We have, especially as makers, I don't know what it is, but we have that whole field of dreams syndrome where we think if we build it, everyone is going to
Yeah.
come and it's going to be great and everybody's going to know about it. And I oftentimes say, and it sounds like it's true for you guys as well, you don't have a sales problem, you have an awareness problem. So there's a
yeah,
lot of advocacy. I got to tell you, if I
Mm-hmm.
when I'm retired, and if I ever get involved in a makerspace, like I'm a connector of people. I love this type of thing. I love to. Sorry, Eric just got a little kiss from his partner. I was, yeah, that was very cute. Um, I love.
I'll bring the dog in next.
Oh, fantastic! People love. Yeah, we love pets. We love pets.
Yeah.
Um, I I love the connection. I love the networking and the amount of opportunity for. We've talked about all the different revenue streams. You could
Mm-hmm.
blow up any one of those little segments by just repeatedly getting in front of the right people. And the story is so good, right? the getting the funding, and I think this is true for education a lot as well. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but finding equipment and finding like companies that are willing to kick in, like, yeah, sure, we'll fund
Mm-hmm.
the build out of the electronics lab or whatever, because it's like there's like a NASCAR model establishment to
Yep.
that, right?
Yeah.
We get the big Ford symbol on like this because we sponsored the build out of that. But then
Mm-hmm.
if you're not telling the story, if you're not in there showing like, oh, doing the tweeting, doing the, social media
Mm-hmm.
bits about it, so that Ford feels good about it, and then so that, Dremel or Black and Decker or whomever else sees it and says, well, we want in on that action as well. I mean,
Yep.
there is so much money to be had in investing in that way, but it takes a certain
Mm-hmm.
special set of
Yeah.
skills and stuff to do that. And I know that um that's not always looked at depending on how the business is structured. If you've got some key players that are coming in and trying to grow this as a sustainable global business, I am honestly surprised that there is not more attention put toward that sales marketing outreach piece. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I think that's like I think every makerspace should go out and hire a high schooler to do their social media as an intern. Um, because like I'm like, what are the TikToks and what are the um, like you need someone who is like aware of the trends and how people receive information
Mm-hmm.
in this modern day and age, and in this like each region is going to be specific. Like you're not going to have like the same level of engagement with social media, in if you have like a makerspace in like the foothills of California as you do in like Silicon Valley. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
going to find the makerspace in different ways. So that has to be like very, very regionally, like geographically customized in a lot of ways. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I I,
Mm-hmm.
I think marketing, that's certainly something that we've struggled with and haven't done as good a job as we'd like. And I think our new executive director Jenny is doing a really great job in getting the word out there and getting the
Nice.
visibility. um, but it's one of those things. Marketing takes upfront investment, and like I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier, like having that nest egg to be like it'll pay dividends. I promise it will. But you have to have that
Yeah.
money up front to like start building your YouTube presence and start building your Twitter
Mm-hmm.
presence and like gaining the traction and gaining followers. And that takes time. And social media is like only one aspect of it. Having someone who
Mm-hmm.
understands like how to do marketing using like Google AdWords or Facebook AdWords,
Yep. Sure.
things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different things that work together, and most maker spaces like don't bring on someone who's like just marketing, like that's just what they do,
Mm.
because it's like that upfront investment can be hard to justify if you don't see like those returns immediately.
Yep. Well, I think that's true for any
It
business,
it
right?
Yeah,
absolutely
sure.
is. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. And we've
Yeah.
said before too, but like I believe it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just tough when you don't necessarily have the coin to front it. But a good sales marketing person
Mm-hmm.
should very, very easily be paying for themselves multiple times over.
Yeah.
But again, without that expertise, without the people at the top that have that belief in that.
Mm-hmm.
Social media is one aspect and one tool of the trade, and a lot of times that has some really great visibility potential. Again, it's about
Mhm.
storytelling. So if I'm going, but again, you have to look at who are you selling to here, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to appeal to your membership and the community, that's probably more your B2C or your
Mm-hmm.
consumer grade thing. When I want to tell the story, when I want to go to Google and get a $500,000 in funding to build out the next thing, I'm gonna show them like, look at all this awesome stuff that we did, but you have to have all that story in place, right? And so
Yep.
Yeah.
it's a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach, and that's your B2B play, which is where a good chunk of your money, your long-term potential money can
Mm-hmm.
be, and where you start to get you're in the best space for that, right? You've got all these great tech people or tech companies that actually have funding allocated to support projects like this. There's probably great ways to weave in opportunities for events where they can have like their staff or staff families be involved and stuff like that. I mean, just my mind's like going crazy, and I'm sure you guys are already doing a lot of stuff like that.
That's actually what one of the primary things that Jen is going to be leaning into a little bit more.
Good. I like
Is
Jenna.
is
I
trying
want
to
to I
Awesome.
do.
want to talk to Jenna some more.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. The there's so many different ways that just like snowballs. You know, once you start doing programs like with like a partnership with Google or Yahoo or Amazon or Apple,
Yeah.
like any of the big tech companies down here, like AMD, like any of those, once you start that partnership,
Uh,
it snowballs very, very quickly.
yeah.
The
Because
biggest
you
challenge
pit
for
them against each other. Because
yeah.
whilst Google gave
Sorry,
us
Apple has us this weekend, but you can get next week.
Yeah, we're booked out for 3 months.
Yeah.
No. It's always you're booked out for 3 months because you
Yeah.
got the Apple gig and you got the Google gig. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
hype guy here, hype guy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another one of the areas that, diversifying, again, diversifying that portfolio, like work with all the companies. Don't be like, oh, we just work with Google or like just work with, like work with
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're an
it's
arms
definitely,
dealer, my
yeah.
friend. You have to play all sides.
Play all the sides.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Listen, next time Joe's in
Yeah.
town, we got to get him to do the next user group thing at your
Oh
guys'
yeah.
space.
No, yeah,
Like,
we'll definitely,
yeah.
yeah, that'd be fantastic. We've got plenty of room. Like I said, 28,000 square feet.
Yeah.
We're running Prusa's primarily.
Yeah.
We've got some other like printers. We got someone is loaning us an Excel, so we're running our first prints on that right now. So I'm pretty excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, I mean, marketing and doing that outreach it's tough. A lot of times it's just getting in the door. Like you get in the door, you find the right person to talk to, and like you're off to the races. But finding that person is the challenge. And that's where someone who like really knows the ins and outs of marketing really pays their dividends is, if they come with a Rolodex of contacts that they already know at a bunch of different companies, like you are like, that's just gold at that point.
Sure.
Hey,
but
pro tip in the
yeah,
chat here again. Another shout out for Josh Manley, cadclass.org. He's saying, maybe you guys already knew this. Google gives 10,000 a month in free ads for nonprofits. That's substantial, man.
yes,
That
yeah.
is crazy.
Yeah, that's one of the great benefits. Like, there's a lot of like, I don't want to call them fringe benefits for nonprofits, but there's a few.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I want to hit on also, kind of
Sure.
like while I'm thinking about it, matching donations. Giving Tuesday, every makerspace should be doing a campaign for Giving Tuesday and capitalizing on the fact that there's a lot of organizations out there that do like 2-to-1 matching.
Yeah.
And that's a way for members of the community to just have like a really outsized impact on like what,
Yeah.
like how they're contributing to a space. And every makerspace that's a nonprofit should be like leaning into that a little bit more. And we use a couple of different features that like integrate. Amply is the primary one that we use in our donor program. So anyone donates to us, they basically do a like almost like a quick little background check of like are they likely to be employed by like Google or Apple or someone else that like matches donation, and then they'll actually send the email with the documents of like, if you fill this out, your organization gets a matching donation. um, and it's very, very like completely seamless and like our end on like our side now. And so like little tools like that, and just like remembering to ask like, hey, does your company do matching donations when
Yeah.
you're doing any type of fundraising as a nonprofit? Just just doubles your money. And
It's free money. It's free
yeah,
money.
right.
No.
Like it's free money. It's free money that a lot of nonprofits are just leaving on the table right now.
And I'll tell you, that
Yeah.
was significant for us. So background really quick. Eric mentioned it. I don't know if you guys know, but we first crossed paths, me and Maker Nexus, at least. I didn't cross paths with Eric until later, but we first crossed paths a couple years ago when we were doing the face shields thing. We were both kind of operating in parallel, and you guys took it a lot further than I ended up doing with my limited resources, because you did eventually get injection
We
molding
went a little
online.
extra on that.
You guys are extra. It was an awesome experience, but we definitely were lucky enough that we were partnered with a nonprofit that helped us get the fund. I mean, it was a perfect storm of things that allowed us to be as effective as we were, but the funding was absolutely critical from that. So I started with seed capital to just like have the materials for printing and the equipment and the laser cutting and all of that stuff. But very quickly it grew out of scope for just, a small business like me. And we had a number of high dollar donors that also doubled basically because they were like employed by tech companies that just had a program, and they only found out, they're like, oh, I just found out my company will match donations, so I'll donate this, and then here's 2x for you as
Wow.
well. And so we're like, oh,
Yeah,
sweet. And
Yeah.
then we started
that's
seeking that
incredible.
out more, and that was a massive boost. So
Yeah.
that's a
Mhm.
great thing. Just having some education and understanding around the mechanics of that, and asking the questions, and getting in
Yep.
front of the right people. Obviously, all the
Yeah.
tricks of the trade.
One of the other like kind of quick pro tips also for nonprofits.
Mm,
This it's going to work better in Silicon Valley than elsewhere.
mm.
Um, but donations of stocks, because
Ah,
when you sell
stock
stocks,
donation.
yeah,
Interesting.
you're going to pay taxes and lose like 20-30% of the value depending on how much that's appreciated. Uh,
Uh-oh, he froze.
Oh no. Oh no.
We'll give him a second to.
profit as this.
There we go. Sorry, you glitched out on us for a second
Oh
there.
no.
You're back. So
All right.
we heard stock donations, and then it chopped.
Yeah. So
Or
someone's trying to
sp-
cut this off and not share this tip. So the tax benefits go both ways. So the person donating it gets the tax write off of the full value, instead of like if they sell it and then give you the cash. Like if they got $4,000 of stock, they're going to pay $10,000 on
Cap
taxes.
gains.
When
Yeah.
they sell.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Yep.
It hits pretty hard. If you donate the actual stocks themselves, the nonprofit gets the full value of it, and they don't pay the cap gain taxes and things like that.
There you go.
So
Oh.
There you
so
go. Tax
and the
loopholes.
yeah, and the person donating it gets the full value of that write-off. So it helps both parties to, and that's one of the things, like when you're asking for donations, like, be creative and look at the different avenues
Ah,
with which you can receive donations, because
That's
that's
super
one that
clever.
there's people, particularly with like how the stock market has like
that's
gone
got
up
to
and
be
down.
capped at some rate, because
Mhm.
so you're telling me that if
It's
I want to go and
it's
sell some stock, rather than sell the stock, take the cap gain hit, I can give you the stock, but I'm not pulling the full cap gain. I'm just getting a write off
Mhm.
as a donation.
Yeah, you're
So
getting
I'm
right.
yeah.
using
Yeah.
it as a donation to
Yep.
basically leverage that donation
Mhm.
amount less the cap gains. Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Less.
I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure there is an upper limit in like how much tax write-off you can get from that.
Yeah,
We haven't hit it. Um, and like
interesting.
we had someone who donated a half Bitcoin. And rather than, they're like, I
Huh.
got this when it was like $100, and I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, it's like $44,000 now
Yeah.
per
Yeah.
Bitcoin. And so they donated because they're like, yeah, I'm just going to get hammered on the taxes. Like I may lose half the value. I'd rather get the tax write off. So they donated it. We went to our broker. And we're like, do you know, like, can we sell it Bitcoin? Like, how do we do this?
In
And they set
crypto.
up, handled the entire transaction, and we sold it, received that as the donation. They got to write off that full value of what we sold it for. And then like 2 weeks later, it tanked. So we're like, wow, sold it just in time.
Yeah, right. Had you guys take
But yeah,
Doge, Shiba Inu coin, any
I,
like
I,
yeah, all the
we
coin.
we take them all at this point. I think that
I
now that
love
we're
it.
set up with a crypto wallet, like I'm not a
Nice.
crypto person.
Well,
But
listen, in the spirit
yeah.
of time here, we're closing in, and we've done a solid
Mhm.
60, and we want to respect
Oh,
your time,
sure.
because I know you got to get back to managing a giant
Mhm.
makerspace. But I've got two final questions for you, if you don't mind. My first is, you work with other maker spaces, like are there ones that you look up to in terms of like what you would aspire to be, or where you take some motivation in terms of other things that you might employ in your own space? So I'll start
Oh,
with that, and
absolutely.
then I'll hit you with the
Yeah.
second one.
Yeah, I definitely want to shout out some of the other like Bay Area maker spaces. Ace Makerspace up in Oakland or Berkeley um, is a phenomenal, very community led organization.
Hmm.
Great community up there, fantastic people. They do a lot of really great community outreach. With the big wildfires that we had here a couple years back, they were doing like box filters and fans and kitting those up and getting those to low income communities. Like, they're doing amazing work, and they're almost, I think they have like one paid staffer.
Oh
I think
wow.
the rest of it's community run, and it's a great little
Wow.
space. Human Made up in San Francisco, run by Ryan Spurlock, is another fantastic nonprofit. They have leaned into a lot of the vocational education, and they do some amazing technical training programs
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
people who are like coming out of housing insecurity or returning vets, things like that. They're doing some amazing vocational work that like I hope that we get there someday where we're
Hmm.
doing some of that like really high level technical training that leads like directly into jobs. We're getting started on it, but they're just like leaps and bounds ahead of where we are
That's
on
fantastic.
that. And
Yeah.
they're a fantastic organization. Ryan and I like both started. He started Human Made at the same time that I was starting Maker Nexus. We both came out of the tech shop community. He was, I think, the general manager at Redwood City,
Hmm.
um, and just a great person overall. Hacker Dojo is a really cool hackerspace, and Northbridge up in San Francisco
Hmm.
also is a really cool hackerspace in the area. Pretty much all of them have a unique like vibe community to
Hmm.
them
Hmm.
that like there's something to be learned from and something to be drawn from. Like you can always improve. Like there's no space that's perfect. You just look like
Hmm.
what works in a given space and be like, I like that. How can we bring that to our community to
Yeah.
improve things here? The organization at Human Made is fantastic. And just like how their entire space, like the entire space aesthetic is like um on the one hand, like very austere, but also like really welcoming in a space. Like you walk in, like, yeah, this is like what a makerspace should feel like, but not so sterile that you're like, this isn't a welcoming space. It's a very cool space. So if you get the chance, definitely recommend visiting them. And then the Crucible in Oakland
Oh, I love the
is
Crucible, man.
they have such a great collection of classes
So
and
cool.
facilities.
And they
Yeah,
do are
they've been
they
around for like 20
they
years,
have
30
like
years, something like that.
that fire festival that they would run
Yeah,
in the evenings in the I don't know if they're still doing that or
probably
if
still doing it.
COVID kind of
Yeah.
jacked it up a little bit, but it was
I think also,
wild.
like, some of the, art space fires in the area, like, anything fire related, they, like, are
Yeah.
taking a little bit of a step back from.
It's just
But yeah,
sad.
it's a phenomenal space, and that's what I look at for, like, when you're there for a long time, like, the type of organization that you can grow. Like, no space, like, no one's gonna be, like, year 1, be like, "Yes, we're like the Crucible."
Right.
Like, just the amount of like, the volume of investment
Hmm.
over
Well,
decades into the
and
facilities is
community and
enormous.
networking because the
Yeah.
thing about the Crucible that was really neat was it's like I think it served that community very well. Like some of their programs, like they had like this hyphy bike building thing where like the kids would get to come out and build these tricked out, bikes and do welding and like learn all that stuff. And it was just like it felt very culturally appropriate to the area and stuff too. And
Yeah.
you're right. There's totally a unique vibe to a lot of these different places and something neat to offer. And when you can combine the amount of opportunity for these things when you can combine causes with
Hmm.
with that space, like that is what just really amplifies like people's desire to get involved, right? Like
Yeah.
that's why we did so well being partnered with a makerspace. The one I was with was called Hacker Lab at the time. Unfortunately, they didn't survive
Oh, up in
COVID.
Sacramento, yeah.
So I was in the Rockland
Hmm.
campus, and then
Okay.
there was a Sacramento one. And unfortunately, they're shut down now as well.
Hey,
But
did
but
I
yeah,
think they just reopened on
well,
a smaller scale.
they
Yeah,
rebranded as
right.
something different. So I
Okay,
don't know if it's fair to
cool.
say that, but
Sure.
Hmm.
there's constant rebirth and stuff happening in
Yeah.
these types of spaces. But what I was going to say was the involvement with that community and the fact, especially with COVID going on and people wanting to get involved with something, feel like they were doing
Hmm.
something, feeling like they were, had a sense of purpose, and how powerful that is for your community, your membership, and all that stuff is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that sense of purpose united so many people and it really built almost overnight a huge community because everyone is actively like seeking that out. And I think that's one of the challenges like coming out of COVID is a lot of people right now are struggling. And so like having the energy and the time available to like go and seek that purpose out or seek
Mm-hmm.
that like
Mm-hmm.
new experience out, I
Yeah.
think right now is a pretty big challenge. I think everyone's just like so drained from like 3 years and like this transitionary period. Um, I think it's a challenging time for maker spaces, but I think it's also a good opportunity to like really lean into the community aspect and say we're bringing people together because so many communities have just been shattered uh, through COVID because like
Absolutely.
three years of distance. Um, there's so many community organizations and spaces that just have evaporated. So I think
Hmm.
makerspaces stand a really good or have a really good opportunity to be a coming together place for those communities as they rebuild. It's going to take time, but I think that that's one of the things that looking forward is our organization we're trying to lean into a little bit right now.
Mm. Last question for you, if I might, Andrew. I don't want to jump off. If you had
No,
anything else,
no,
feel free.
no. Go ahead.
But last question. What advice do you have for makers out there that might be listening to this or watching this that are interested in potentially getting their own space together? Because I talked to a number of people who are like, oh, it'd be so cool. I just don't have anything in our area. So
Yeah.
what advice do you have for organizers to get started? And again, knowing what you know now with sustainability in mind, like it can't just be this. It's not, oh, we're just going to get people together. People are going to pay. It's going to work out great. Like, what are the
Yeah.
key?
Ooh,
Yeah,
that's
that's a big one. I know.
it's a big question. Build a good team.
It's all about team.
It's no like I say like all I really did to start Maker Nexus was stand up and be willing to be the person who is like talking, and to be like the like front person of this. Kristen Winkelbauer, Regina Sakles, Jim Shrimp, a couple others, like they put in hours upon hours of just like thankless work building an
Mm.
organization from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And like I could say anything I wanted. And for the most part, they're like, yeah, we'll do that. Um, but always, like really always try to be like, this is a team, a community. Building that team
Mm-hmm.
that's going to get things started is step number one. And we were like we lucked into it. We were just like look for the helpers. You hear
Mm-hmm.
that phrase a lot. Like
Yeah.
look for the helpers.
Yeah.
When I was looking around and be like, we've been talking about like how we could like how this should be done better. Now's our chance to like actually like put our money where our mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
I looked around mostly for the people that were trying to help others in the community
Yeah.
that were willing to give of themselves. That's one of the like really key things in building that team is looking for people who want to help and want to build things. And then looking for a diversity of skills and backgrounds, education levels. Um, like, part of building that team is like you need a good accountant, like
Mm-hmm.
good treasurer. Like you can't
Yeah.
do without it. So
Yeah.
many maker spaces fail because like someone just like books are tough. Like, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to do them. You have to manage the finances.
Yep.
Um, you have to have like that hype person, like that the person who's like willing to get up there and communicate and share a vision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you need someone that's going to be like, no, no, like that's a little too far. Reel it in.
Yep.
You need the reality check of like we've got all these hopes and dreams, but here's what's like what you actually like can achieve.
Yeah.
Putting that team together is like 95% of the battle. Um, and the other 5% is make sure you start with enough money. And it's tough. Starting a makerspace is expensive.
Yep.
Signing
Mm-hmm.
leases, getting insurance, training, painting all the walls, bringing in new equipment, ripping up carpet, polishing for like all of it costs money.
Yep.
Um, and there's a lot of maker spaces that spend a lot of money to get like right to the point where they're ready to open and then run out of money.
Mm.
No.
And like
Mm-hmm.
it's
I mean,
it's tough.
it's true.
There's a lot of
It's true for any business. You got to give yourself enough runway. I think
yeah.
people aren't
Mm-hmm.
realistic about what things actually cost. Everything costs a lot more
Yeah.
than you expect. And the
Can I take
people,
like 2 minutes
Yes.
and share like my pitch for what I'd like to see in maker
please.
spaces?
Yes.
So Tech Shop, if are you familiar at all with the Tech Shop?
I'm not.
Okay, so they were a for-profit makerspace, had like 11 locations nationwide. They did some good things. They also ended up $30 million in debt or
Mm,
so. So they did some not so good things. But one of their core ideas that I really think we should be leaning into as a community of makerspaces
mm,
is shared resources and infrastructure. Every makerspace is solving kind of the same core problems. They're building the same curriculum in like how to run a wood shop safely.
mhm,
They're building the same infrastructure in like how to like accept a membership and track permissions for using machines or have building access.
mhm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
they're building the same youth summer camps and all this knowledge is shareable and transferable from location to location to location.
Yeah.
If you have a kind of like a not necessarily like a governing body, but a single clearinghouse of expertise. Finding
Mm-hmm.
an architect that knows what a makerspace is costs a lot of money and a lot of time. If you have an architect like, hey, call these people up, they know what a makerspace is, they'll help you design your building. that'll save tens of thousands of dollars of searching. Having someone who's familiar with permitting, having someone that you can call up and be like, hey, I'm having issues with the
Mhm.
local city trying to get my wood shop permitted, tips and tricks, and having someone that has the experience with that. But having all of that in a kind of a shared location or a shared organization.
Mm-hmm.
um, Finding
Mhm.
insurance is you've run into it. It's every organization, every makerspace are doing these same problems and solving them individually over and over and over again. They're
Yep.
reinventing the wheel. They're
Yeah.
coming up with like variations of the wheel, but
Mhm.
they still have the same wheel like aspiring to the same wheel. So I'd like to see,
Mhm.
and kind of like one of my longer term goals is have a national or international organization
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
facilitating makerspace foundation and growth, and providing the advice and counseling and coaching and training to make maker spaces more likely to be successful. I'm kind of like not really like a franchising look, like idea approach to it, but you go to a Taco Bell across the country, like they aren't all owned by Taco Bell, they're owned by local
Right.
owners,
Right.
but they've got the
Mhm.
Taco Bell menu and they've got the Taco Bell,
Mhm.
training. Like you go to Taco Bell, you know what you're going to get, you know that there's going to be like it's going to be the same across the country. And I don't think that that works for maker spaces. But if you take the underlying system of like, this is how you place an order, this is how you make a taco, this is like how you set up a
Mhm.
drive through, and you build a local community around that, I think it can really eliminate a lot of the challenges and shortfalls that so many maker spaces run into just by having people have already done it being there
Mhm.
to support along the way of like this is like the small business administration for maker spaces. Like this is where you
Yes,
get
I
your
was gonna say this is
mentoring
why
and your
That's
professional
awesome.
communities
yeah,
Yeah.
exist. This is why, and
yeah.
I've said for, part of the
Mhm.
reason Andrew and I connected originally is because we felt like there weren't nearly enough resources for small business and stuff like that to do, and I didn't feel like the local chamber of commerce was appropriate for my style of business and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
as more and more of these entities come online, there are more efficiencies to be gained. Josh Manley, the guy that was on a couple weeks ago, was talking about this exact same thing, and he does consulting for
Mhm.
makerspaces, specifically for this reason. Like, hey, let's not reinvent the wheel. There can be some best practice here that we can all learn and benefit from. Maybe it's 80-20%, where it's like,
Yeah.
there's going to be 20% of what makes you guys unique and has your own flair. You're not having to compromise things, but there's a lot of administrative overhead and things that just need to get handled that everybody can benefit from, right?
And yeah, and
Mhm.
just think how much creativity can be unleashed if like
Right.
for a wood shop class, like you've got your basic wood one, and that's like learning how to use your table saw, joiner, planer, chop saw.
Yeah.
Like that's our wood one class. Like if you hand that to another makerspace, whoever was going to develop that class at that makerspace now gets to move to the level 2 class and develop
Mhm.
that instead.
Mhm.
And so now you've added that like level 1 and 2 class because you just didn't do like two parallel level 1 classes.
Mhm.
And so
Yep.
like there's so much efficiency to be gained and so much creativity to be unlocked by doing something like this. Like that's really where I would like to see things going in the next like 5 to 10 years.
Mhm.
um, really building a nation of makers. I had hoped would kind of like go that direction, but it's been pretty dormant. But I think that's one of the things that if someone like Adam Savage or Mark Rober or someone like one of the other people who has like a
The
really
faces,
large
yeah, the large
yeah, the
presence.
faces could
Yeah.
like really get
Yeah.
behind and help support an organization like that. I think it would benefit, people around the world, not just like regionally or nationally, but this is something that you go to France, all you're doing is translating your woodshop one class, or you go to like somewhere in Africa, you're can bring those tools and that same training, and all you're doing is
Mhm.
all of that translates, and then you can unleash a huge amount of creative potential that right now isn't being served very well.
Well, in the words of the great Adam Savage, it's not a problem to solve, it's a process to manage, and that requires a
Mhm.
very specific skill set that is not fully common to our kind as makers a lot of times. Like the vast majority of people that are excited about making just want to make cool shit, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's fine. That's great. I love that too, but I want to see this thing be sustainable and grow long
Yeah.
term and stuff. And so we need to find some leadership and some camaraderie, because I agree with you fully. It's about the people that you surround yourself with. Like, that is one of the most precious resources, and finding those people with those special skill sets are really what's going to
Mhm.
move the whole community forward any more potentially meaningful way. It's not to say that it has to be that way. There are certainly people that want their regional flair, and I think that they can coexist. But
absolutely.
it's going to take those things. So that's a great place to wrap up, because it's just so perfect for business, for the commonality between us and a makerspace, or whether you're for profit or not for profit, all of that stuff. A lot of good little nuggets in there. So I thank you for your time and your insight on all of that. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to do a check-in. I look forward to rolling down and seeing the new space soon. I'm a Bay Area native, and so it's like every time I'm down there, I'm like, I got to go check out Eric's place, and it just never seems to click. But we're gonna do it. Maybe I'll get Josh to roll with me, and we'll go. We're always looking for cool maker spaces, and go spend some time, and we'll just do some.
Come down. I'll
make some fun things.
I'll pull out my hand planes, and we'll make some like wood
Sweet. We'll
shavings
blow up a planer or something.
Yeah.
Rad, man. Well, thank you
so much for your time and having me on here.
Yeah, no problem. Everybody, if you're with us still, thank you so much for watching. We really quick teaser. I'm gonna drop this episode's gonna drop in the next day or two. We're gonna drop a bonus episode this weekend of my interview with Joe Prusa from the meetup that Eric and I were at for the Prusa user group meetup we were at. That was like 2 weeks ago now, but it's taken me that long to chop it and put my intro on it and all that stuff. So anyway, that's coming out, so watch for that. If you haven't joined and followed the Maker That Money Twitter, that's like where our official announcements are going now. We'll of course retweet it on ours, but if you haven't already, please follow, like, subscribe, all that stuff. You can catch Andrew over at 3D Gloop. I made a mistake. I didn't put the actual tag, but Eric, if you're interested in checking out Eric's organization, they're just at Maker Nexus on most I think of the social media things, but makernexus.com.
Yeah, pretty much all of them.
Go to the website, check out their stuff. Awesome place. Tons of great resources. If you have kids and you're in the Bay Area, you're looking for stuff for them to do this summer, get them involved. This is the perfect place to do that. And
do you want to see the dog for the extra views?
Yes. Let's get those dog views in here. Get the dog bump. There it is. Oh, what's is it? What's is it?
He. Yeah.
What's his name?
Butters, and it's kind of the
Butters with
mascot.
a B or a P?
Yep.
B. Butters, like from South Park.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. You guys are awesome. Thank you guys for being in the chat. We love you. We will catch you next week. We're gonna have Josh back, and we're gonna talk about some more awesome making related stuff. Until then, keep on making, everybody, and we will